True Crime Brewery contains disturbing content related to real-life crimes. Medical information is opinion based on facts of a crime and should not be interpreted as medical advice or treatment. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to True Crime Brewery. I'm Jill.
And I'm Dick.
Julie Miller met Dennis Bulloch through a newspaper ad, and she fell hard for him. He seemed like the answer to all of her problems. As a successful executive approaching her 30th birthday, Julie was ready to get married. Dennis seemed like the all-American guy, good-looking, and described as soft-hearted and sensitive by his former girlfriends. Just 4 months into their marriage, emergency responders were called out to a fire at the Bullock's home. Amid the charred debris, they found a body, duct-taped to a rocking chair. The face was burned beyond recognition. This is a case that took place before Match.com or Tinder. Julie was attractive, successful in her career, but she was socially immature. And she was very lonely. She wanted someone to spend her life with and to perhaps start a family of her own. Dennis Bulloch seemed to check all of these boxes for her. But he had a dark side that she didn't see. If there were signs or clues to a darker side of Dennis, Julie may have overlooked them, because more than anything, she wanted to be married. So we'll talk about this, as well as the histories of Julie and Dennis, in today's episode, Happily Never After, the murder of Julie Miller Bulloch.
So I picked a beer just for you today.
Thank you. What is it?
It's called Fuzzy, and it's brewed by Side Project Brewing in Maplewood, Missouri. It's an American wild ale, so one of your lovely sours.
Wonderful.
This one is a kind of a cloudy amber color with a tiny white head that just disappears pretty rapidly. Pretty nicely carbonated beer, like a lot of wild ales.
Yeah.
It's got a beautiful peachy aroma. And a tiny bit of that stuff you don't like so much, the funky stuff. But not...
I don't know. I think I like funky stuff as long as it's not real salty what are the salty ones?
Those are gozes.
Yeah, sometimes those are too salty.
Yeah, now this has just got that little bit of funk to it.
Great.
And a beautiful taste. Nice tart peach taste. Very subtle. Very good. Great beer to drink. If you like sours. Which you do.
I do.
So I'm going to take this down to the quiet end and open it just for you.
All right, let's open it.
You can share it if you wish, or you can hog it all to yourself.
Okay, let's open it.
Okay.
Nice stay at the quiet end. I think soon we'll be able to do some outdoor drinking.
Yeah, the weather's warming. Although you wouldn't know that by today, but it is warming.
Yes.
And yeah, I think they'll open up the deck and we can do some of this stuff outside.
I like to do that, and then we can bring the dogs along as well.
Sure. If they're not a pain in the ass.
Well, yeah, sometimes they are, but if you buy them French fries and take them for a walk, they're nice.
Yeah, and we don't have to share our beer with them.
No.
So as a child, Julie was easy to love. She was eager to please her parents, and she was this adorable little blonde with a pixie haircut and big blue eyes. As an adult, Julie would say that her father only gave her attention when she was in trouble. So that's an interesting comment, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very interesting. There's something going on there.
Yes. Now, her father was much older than Julie's mother, and he was almost 60 years old when Julie was born. So he gets home from work in the evenings. He didn't have much energy to play with Julie and her little brother Carter Miller Jr., who came later. Although Julie's mother would blame Carter Sr. for being cold to his children, Julie grew up blaming herself. After all, she tried to do everything perfectly to earn his love. She had a collection of dolls which her father had brought home from his business trips, and she kept them in tidy rows up on her shelves in her room. She'd clean the room without being asked. Now, when she was a teenager, the family moved. She liked the new neighborhood. The Miller's house was a 4-bedroom, 2.5-bath colonial on a wooded cul-de-sac. Now, it hadn't been easy moving from Brentwood, which was a middle-class suburb of St. Louis, across the country to New Jersey. She had to change schools as a 13-year-old, which many teens would fight and resent their parents for. But Julie seemed to take it all in stride.
Well, Julie was a people pleaser through and through, to her own detriment many times.
I remember the time when we moved from South Carolina to Maine, our youngest, who was, 14, I think. She was a pain in the ass.
It's very upsetting when you're that age, though. For most kids, it is.
The most traumatic event she'd ever had.
Absolutely. So when the Millers first moved to New Jersey, Julie attended parochial schools, Our Lady of the Valley, and later DePaul High School. She wanted to transfer to a public school because she really hated how strict and regimented they were. This was her only rebellious act in the late 1960s and early 70s. And Julie fit in at the public high school immediately. Like I said, she was a real people pleaser and very easy to get along with. The caption beneath her high school senior yearbook picture read, "A very simple book with very large print and very easy to read." So not exactly what a woman wants to hear.
I would think. That's kind of a put-down.
It kind of is.
Who wrote that?
Whoever was in charge of the yearbook committee.
Staff?
Yeah. Well, as we've learned lately, these yearbooks are not well monitored back in the 70s, 80s.
Apparently not.
But Julie was above average looking, really. She was petite, kind of curvy. She had beautiful skin, peaches and cream complexion, big blue eyes, a little kind of Sandra Dee nose, they described it as. And she wore her blonde hair long and straight, which was the fashion at the time. But unlike the hippies of her generation, she was meticulous about her appearance, her clothing, and even her belongings. She was never wild, and she never experimented with drugs or alcohol or sex. She did have a steady boyfriend, but that relationship was more friendly than lustful. All she wanted really was the American dream of that era, a nice husband, children, and a home of her own. So she was a little bit old-fashioned. She learned to sew at a young age, and she decorated her bedroom all by herself, making her own bedspread with matching curtains and pillows. She did have some sleepovers with her best friend Laura, where the girls would get into Julie's twin beds, and they would talk in the dark about what they wanted for their futures, who they were going to marry, what they would name their children, how many children they would have, also what careers they wanted. Julie was always vague about the specifics, but she wanted a nice home, was the way she put it.
That's pretty generalized.
Yes.
So one of those nights at about 2 a.m, Julie's mother, Mary Jane, woke the girls up by pretending to be a ghost with a sheet over her head in the bedroom doorway. That's a great way to wake. The next morning, Mary Jane let the girls try on her jewelry. So she had a pretty impressive collection of jewelry for a middle-class mom, and it would all be Julie's one day. To some, Mary Jane seemed almost too close to Julie. Whenever Julie had any problem, she'd run to her mother. Her friends thought her mother overprotected her. There's also the thought, though, that Mary Jane was possibly reacting to something sinister in the family, kind of overcompensating.
That's what people would say looking back, some people.
Well, 20 years later, Julie was admitted to a psychiatric ward where she told her caretakers that something traumatic had happened to her as a child. It changed her entire life, she said. Ruined it, in fact. Now, Mary Jane had never mentioned any abuse to her women friends, but she did complain that her husband and her daughter did not get along. So this is all kind of nebulous stuff.
It is, and it's the kind of thing that unfortunately would have been kept secret in a lot of homes.
Well, if you're talking about sexual abuse,
that's a possibility.
It certainly would have been.
Well, she felt emotionally distant from her father for whatever the reason, so she and her brother became quite close. Carter Miller Sr. was in his 50s when he married the 33-year-old Mary Jane, and that was in 1953. He was an Air Force captain during World War II, and he'd come to St. Louis as a fabric buyer. Mary Jane quit her job as an office supervisor right before the wedding, and the reception was held in the house where Mary Jane had grown up. Then Julie was born in 1954, just 7 months after her mother's wedding.
Well.
So, could have been a pregnancy-induced marriage, as we call it.
It certainly could have been. There's no mention of her being a premature infant.
No.
Yeah, that sounds reasonable.
Well, then her brother, Carter Jr., was born in 1958, and the marriage seemed happy early on. Carter Sr. loved Mary Jane and was devoted to making her happy. She was younger and fun, something very desirable to him as a childless widower. But he became a bit overshadowed by his wife's joyfulness. Mary Jane complained to her closest friend that her sex life was really lacking. Her husband's lack of energy turned into a problem outside of the bedroom as well. He just became this old, tired man, at not that old of an age. To get his father's attention, Carter Jr. became the family clown, and Julie became the little caretaker, making everything nice for everyone. Julie never discovered what she wanted to do with her life, but she did know that she wanted to get married. While her friends went off to college, Julie stayed with her mother, and she commuted to the nearby Montclair State College. She made straight A's, but she soon dropped out of school and just took the first job she found, and that was at Prudential Insurance. According to her brother Carter, Julie ruined her life because she was always taking care of everyone but herself. And that's a theme in her life.
Yeah, she seems to forsake herself to work for others' happiness.
Which is good in small amounts, but
Right.
she did it to her own detriment.
But if that's the guiding force of your life...
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think there is something really good about taking care of others, like Mother Teresa or something, right?
Yeah, but she's no Mother Teresa.
No. But she just kind of hurt herself by doing this. I think she wasn't choosy enough about who she was helping, for one thing, because if you help the right people, it's a mutual thing.
Sure. But I think she was doing this to make herself feel better, I think.
About herself?
About herself.
Sure.
And not working hard enough on doing what makes her happy.
Well, a lot of it was circumstances in her life as well. I mean, in 1978, their mother, Mary Jane, was dying from breast cancer. At the same time, their father, Carter Sr., was disabled from strokes. So she probably felt she needed to just kick in there and be the caretaker. Carter was in college, and he would come home for the breaks. He came home for Christmas break when Julie was 24, and she was juggling an office job in the early morning and having late evening visits to the hospital with her parents. So the two siblings took turns going in and out of 2 intensive care rooms. It's a lot of stress for 2 people in their early 20s.
That's definite. Yeah.
That's more the thing you deal with when you're in your 40s or 50s. But it happened young for them.
It did. And I sensed that Julie was the one who took charge with all this, and Carter was kind of the assistant to her.
Yeah, she was the caretaker, she was the woman, all that.
Yeah. So the doctors told the kids that they couldn't take care of both parents at home. They could take Mary Jane home, but their father needed to be put into a nursing home. Both parents had been in and out of the hospital since the previous Christmas. So it'd been a tough year.
Yes. Well, it had really been 5 years since Julie had a normal life, since she was 19 years old and the family had moved back to St. Louis. She was very lonely. Her high school friends were away at college, or they'd moved out to the East Coast, and she really had no time for socializing anyway. Her mother had a mastectomy, which I imagine back then was one of those horrible radical mastectomies, right?
In 78? Absolutely.
So that would have been a traumatic surgery.
That's a horrible surgery.
Yes. So Julie spent her nights and weekends helping her parents. She had her own apartment until her father began having the strokes, so then she felt like she had to move back home to care for them and also to contribute financially to their care.
Yeah.
A lot of responsibility.
Because neither of the parents were going to be able to work.
No.
Right?
Nope. Well, as a young adult, she really didn't have her own life. She became the head of this household with 2 terminally ill parents and a teenage brother. So there was no dating, no trying out different careers or taking classes, and no planning for the life that she wanted. There was nothing for Julie except work, sewing, and caring for her parents. That's all she did.
That was her life.
After 4 years of suffering repeated strokes and heart attacks, Carter Sr. died from pneumonia in 1979. Mary Jane lived for 4 more years, but she went through chemotherapy and radiation, so it was a very difficult time for Julie and her mother. In 1980, Julie was 26, and she went out of town for an AT&T management seminar. She had moved to AT&T from her job at Prudential, and she was excited because she was being promoted to management. But then Julie was taken from class one morning for an urgent call, learning that her mother's breast cancer had metastasized and the prognosis was really bad.
Yes, Mary Jane worried that her daughter didn't enjoy life enough. And her last words to Julie's brother Carter were, "Make your sister laugh more." Just 2 weeks after Julie's 29th birthday, her mother died.
Julie's friends came to the funeral, and they were worried about her, but she was surprisingly calm. She was dry-eyed, well-dressed, and she told her friend Nora, "Mommy would have wanted me to look this way. She would have expected me to handle this." So she didn't break down and cry in front of anyone. And she said to a friend that day, "I need to be careful because I wouldn't want someone to marry me for my money," because she has inherited a fair amount of money for someone so young.
To me, that's a strange statement to make.
It really is.
At the wake for your mother's death.
It had to be something her mother told her for her to say it then, I think.
I don't know why she would say that.
Someone planted the idea in her head, I think.
Yeah, possibly. That's true.
Yeah.
I mean, she had so much dependency on her mother.
Yes, I think her mom probably warned her.
Maybe her final words to Julie were, "Take care, be careful, don't marry someone who's after your money."
Yeah.
Because her words to her son was, "Make sure you make your sister laugh more."
So she was worried about her daughter.
It would seem.
And I really think that she may have seen in Julie this kind of low self-esteem, maybe naivete.
Yeah. Vulnerability.
Yes. So that was her way to try and protect her, is to tell her, be careful.
Yeah.
So Julie did pay more attention to her career after her mom died, especially the way she looked at work. She wore these nice designer business suits with closed-toe pumps, and she worked hard and started to earn a really good salary. She'd also inherited money, of course, and she'd inherited this expensive jewelry collection that her mom had. So Julie was living alone in the house she inherited, and she may have felt really abandoned and lonely. She worked by herself all day in a cubicle, and her only companions when she got home in the evenings were her cat and her little Lhasa dog. So to keep herself busy, Julie went back to sewing and handicraft, something she was good at and had done for years. And she cross-stitched a present for her brother's wedding, because Carter was getting married. And I'm sure this didn't make her feel great either, that her younger brother was getting married, and she's probably starting to feel like, I don't know, for lack of a better word, a spinster.
Oh.
I mean, it is only like 1980, and people still felt that way quite a bit. And she was old-fashioned.
Yeah, well, she's 29 years old, right, when her mom died. And, yeah, I mean, that's getting kind of long in the tooth to get married.
Well, I guess in those days. I don't see it that way at all now, but she might have felt that way, sure.
Oh, I think so.
Because she really wanted more than anything to get married to her Prince Charming. But like we said, she was kind of socially immature. She didn't have much experience with that. So she would immediately fall in love with every guy she dated, and that would end up scaring them away.
Well, no kidding.
Yeah. Because, there was still some free love in the air, and people were, just because they had sex with her, they didn't necessarily think they were in love forever. But that's the way she saw it.
Well, yeah. We make love, we're going to get married.
That's the way she saw it, yeah.
Pretty black and white.
And a lot of her social life included co-workers, and some of them were married. Part of that may have come from her lack of social skills, but most of the single men she dated were not the greatest. Her friend Nora said that Julie was a lure to creeps. She just wasn't discriminating enough. But she wanted a professional, nice-looking guy with a good job, and she became really fixated over any guy in a suit who gave her attention. She would go ahead and buy them gifts. Now, one example I read about was after 2 weeks of dating a coworker, it was his birthday, and Julie went out and spent $300 on him. So he was probably thinking, wow.
He was probably thinking, I'm in love.
I don't know. I think it kind of scared him off.
It was ironic, in a sense, that Julie was using her money to impress men when she had said she didn't want anyone to date her for her money. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, a little bit of a contradiction there, huh?
But you used what you got, you know?
Yeah. So she decided to renovate the house she inherited. She didn't hide her attraction for some of the men who worked on the house for her. One of these was a landscaper. She ended up inviting him for a candlelight dinner to thank him for his work. The next morning, she told a friend how she had made love with the landscaper. So, yeah, he does his work, rewards him with a dinner, takes him to bed.
And this was one of those times when she saw it differently than he did. She was just so hungry for affection that she was heartbroken when he didn't call her back. And he said that he was recovering from a divorce and busy running his business. But Julie showed up unannounced at his office, and she called him there repeatedly. It got to the point where his employees would tell Julie he was out or busy. And this is a pattern that would repeat itself, unfortunately, in Julie's life. And this is really a sad story because she's a good person, and I just hate to see women who don't give themselves enough credit and let men mistreat them. It's just so sad.
Yeah, because you can already kind of see where things are heading.
Yeah.
Here.
She's so vulnerable.
This isn't a good path that she's taking.
No, she's a target for assholes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So she began seeing an employee's assistance program counselor at her company, and this person sent Julie to a psychiatrist. And the psychiatrist determined that Julie suffered from the delusion that meeting Mr. Right would solve all her problems.
And it's true, because she had come up with a plan that she'd told some women at work about. She said all she had to do to be happy is to meet Mr. Right. So that's when she went ahead and ran an ad in the local paper. And the ad read, "Are you a really nice guy? If yes, this nice girl wants you to read on. I'm single, white, female, 30 years old, 5'2", 125 pounds, whose appearance is pleasing to the eyes. My 9-to-5 life is professional. Other time is combination creative and a suburban homebody. I've realized life without a boyfriend isn't all that much fun. You are the type of man who's emotionally mature, likes himself, but not egotistically, and wants a girlfriend. Hopefully you're 29 to 36 years old, 5'9" or taller, weight proportionate, with looks that are easy on the eyes, and no children from a previous marriage. Send brief letter and phone number, let's meet for coffee, and something really nice could happen for both of us." What do you think of the ad?
Desperation.
I don't know. I think for the time, those were the kind of ads people ran. And she's kind of picky about what she wants. She's not saying, I'll take anybody. He can't have children. He's got to be a certain height and weight.
Not that picky.
Maybe she's not picky about the right things, but she does have criteria in there.
I'll buy that. She definitely wasn't picky about the things that I would consider to be important.
Right. But I mean, how do you ask for the important things in an ad? That's hard to verbalize.
I guess, yeah, you're right. You got to go out with them a little bit and get comfortable, and then you start hitting them with the important stuff.
Right. So you can really only ask for the superficial for the most part until you get to know someone a little.
Yeah. So Julie reassured her lady friends at work that this was safe. She would only meet these men for lunch, and she would also call their employees to verify that they were who they said they were.
So that's smart. Smarter than a lot of friends I've had.
Yes. Your sister comes to mind.
Ouch.
Never mind. So Julie was pretty happy because she got multiple responses to her ad. The best one in her mind came in August 1985. This was from a guy with an MBA and a career as a senior management consultant at Price Waterhouse, and he had a house in the suburbs. He was a member of the Young Republicans and the Friends of the Art Museum, and he belonged to the Classical Guitar Society. He was 32 years old, in the midst of a divorce, and had no children. Now, his photocopied picture showed a really strikingly handsome guy.
Well, I could not find any pictures of him, but everyone said, in anything I read about this that he was very good looking.
Really good looking.
So we're going to have to just take people's word for it.
I will. And this guy's name was Dennis Neil Bullock.
Yeah, so Julie was smart. She looked up his phone number on her telephone company's database, and she tracked down if he had paid his telephone bills on time. So when he passed that test, she called someone she knew at Price Waterhouse and confirmed that he was a senior consultant there. So it's checking out so far. This was confirmed, so she called Dennis and left him a message. And it took her a few times before she could do it. She was very nervous. The next day, he returned her call, and they made a date for lunch downtown near their offices. Julie was up early the morning of their first meeting and trying on different outfits. She surprised her carpool group that morning by discussing her upcoming lunch date, and this was the first time that she'd ever mentioned her dating life to any of them. And then she passed around his photo kind of proudly. And most of them were like, oh yeah, he's good looking. But one older woman in the group said, oh, Julie, he has really mean, evil eyes. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
That woman saw something in him that was there. But by lunchtime, Julie was really nervous, and Dennis was even more handsome in person. He was nearly 6 feet tall, very muscular, and he had this sun-bleached blonde hair. He was impressed with Julie too, though. But for different reasons, because he could tell she was a professional with some money, and she was on the same executive level as his estranged wife. She even worked for the same company. And I think a lot of his motivation was to kind of show that estranged wife that he could do better.
And then when he got invited to her house, he was very impressed. It wasn't a mansion, but it was certainly more upscale than where Dennis came from. So he began dating her. He started to notice her extensive jewelry collection that she had inherited from her mother. And the collection was appraised at a value higher than his parents' house. So she had some good pieces, didn't she?
Some very good pieces of jewelry.
Dennis said the loss of Julie's mother and the loss of his sister, both to cancer, drew them together. Now, Julie soon began to feel like she couldn't do enough for him. But the two were opposites. Dennis was oblivious to the pain he might inflict on others, while Julie was so attuned to everyone else's feelings that she was unaware of her own feelings.
Yeah, it was almost that extreme to that point where she just didn't even really know what made her happy because she was so focused on making everyone else happy.
I know that's laudable, but it doesn't do much for yourself.
No, it doesn't.
Your well-being.
No, you need a balance, right? Just like anything, you need a balance.
You definitely do. So why don't we take a short break here? We'll get our sponsors spoken for and then return.
Lorena Bobbitt. What comes to your mind when I say that name?
Well, I could tell you a few things, but...
Never mind. Amazon Prime Video and executive producer Jordan Peele bring you the new docuseries, Lorena, a Sundance official selection that shares Lorena Bobbitt's side of the story and investigates the headlines and press coverage 25 years later. The story was irresistible. Guilt or innocence would come down to whom the jurors would believe. What did he do to make her do something like that? The defense says the years of abuse put her over the edge. But this was a true battle of the sexes.
Wasn't it? Now, what it meant in 1993 isn't that different from what it means today in 2019. Beneath the tabloid headlines and talk show jokes was something far more complicated. Now, the scandal you know about, but the story you don't. Watch the new 4-part docuseries, Lorena, February 15th on Amazon Prime Video.
I think it's funny that it's the day after Valentine's Day, but I really can't wait to watch it.
I wonder if that was intentional.
It might have been.
If you're struggling to get a good night's sleep, you gotta try a Purple mattress. Purple mattress will probably feel different from anything you've ever experienced because it uses this brand new material that was developed by an actual rocket scientist.
It's not like the memory foam I'm used to. The Purple material is both firm and soft at the same time, so it keeps everything supported while still feeling really comfortable. Plus, it's breathable to keep you cool. Try it for 100 nights risk-free And if you're not completely satisfied, you can return your mattress and get a full refund. It's backed by a 10-year warranty. Plus, you get free shipping and returns.
You are going to love purple. And right now, our listeners will get a free purple pillow with the purchase of a mattress. And that's in addition to the great free gifts they are offering site-wide.
Just text brewery to 797979. The only way to get this free pillow is to text brewery to 797979. That's BREWERY to 797979. Message and data rates may apply.
So 3 weeks after that fateful August lunch date, Julie was talking about little else besides her future with Dennis. Now Dennis, on the other hand, wasn't that much into thinking about her. His diary, guys keep diaries?
He kept extensive diaries, but he was extremely narcissistic.
Apparently. His diary was filled with descriptions of a trip he made with his girlfriend. No mention of Julie Miller.
Now, early on in his relationship with Julie, Dennis had lunch with his best friend, and he said that he met a woman through her newspaper ad who seemed nice, but he refused to tell him the woman's name. And that would be the first and the last time that Dennis mentioned his future wife to this guy who he called his best friend. While Julie devoted herself to him, Dennis was actually dating and sleeping with several other women. And Julie would do whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted. She was a copy of his first wife, but one who he could control. By the time he was divorced in December, Dennis thought Julie was his long-searched-for ideal. She would help him, she would support him with everything he wanted in life. And she was worth more than $300,000. He was not that into Julie herself, but he knew that her money could do a lot for him.
Yeah, and for Julie, she felt that she had finally found her Prince Charming. But it turns out that Mr. Right, or Prince Charming, as it were, was not the solution to all of her problems, as she had hoped. Julie became more and more depressed, and she began to focus more and more on the death of her mother.
He had a lunch with some female co-workers in late September 1985. Julie was oddly quiet. And once they had their food, she made an announcement. She said, "I'm admitting myself to a psych ward. I'm just so miserable." So it turned out that Julie couldn't always hide her illness. At a jeweler's she and her mother had gone to for years, she was trying on several pairs of earrings, and she turned around and said, "Mommy, what do you think I should get?" But this was after her mother had been dead for 2 years. So the salesperson was looking at her like, something's not right here.
Yeah, who's she talking to?
Yeah.
Julie's brother Carter was shocked when Julie told him she was going into a psych ward. Carter kept asking her why she was doing that, and Julie finally answered, "Because Dennis thinks it's a good idea."
Aha, so there's the truth.
So do you think it was him pushing her to do that?
Absolutely, I do.
We're hearing about how she was becoming more and more depressed, and I was thinking it was kind of laudable that she recognized this stuff and wanted to help herself and was going into a psych hospital. But if it turns out that it was only because her future husband thought it was a good idea, I'm less impressed.
I don't think it's as simple as either or. I think there's a combination of things going on here that we can't fully understand. We're not there.
True.
And she did have a lot of issues from her childhood, obviously. But I think that Dennis did think it was a good idea that he could have her hanging on a chain, but kind of out of the way, so he could do as he liked.
Yeah, well, certainly.
Kind of put her on a shelf there in the psych ward.
If they're getting kind of serious in their relationship, and he's still a player, it'd be good to have her out of his hair for a while.
It would. Not that she was demanding in any way.
No, but, with her hospitalized, he could screw around to his heart's content.
Absolutely. And he would use this against her in the future as well. It makes her vulnerable to say she was in a psych ward for a time, right?
Yes, it does. And, I guess this guy's a real sweetheart anyway.
Yeah. So it was Dennis who took her to the psychiatric ward on September 23rd. This is according to records at St. John's Mercy Medical Center. And Julie ended up staying there for 7.5 weeks. The hospital has a really good reputation, but Julie hated it there. and as she walked the halls of the hospital, she began carrying a teddy bear with her. Instead of talking directly to the staff or other patients, Julie would communicate through this teddy bear. After a week of treatment with some mild tranquilizers, she was put on Thorazine, which is pretty strong, right? What kind of drug is that?
Well, it's one of the older antipsychotics. It's pretty powerful. A lot of side effects, too.
Yeah, not something that's really used much anymore?
No.
Good. But she was diagnosed as suffering from affective disorder and depression, suffering with guilt, anxiety, loneliness, and poor self-esteem. And that all sounds like Julie, from what we've read.
Yeah, it sounded like, though, she really went downhill in the hospital.
It does.
She sounded like she was in better shape when she first checked herself in.
Absolutely. I think so. And I'm not sure why. If they were over-medicating her, if Dennis was involved at all in the treatment she got, I'm not sure. But she did also have these obsessive-compulsive personality attributes and borderline personality disorder features, according to her doctors. But she may have been misdiagnosed. Her behaviors were pretty typical of bipolar depression, and these patients can swing between depression and mania, so they can go from the deepest despondency to being very optimistic. So severely depressed people who are passive and dependent can really seem like borderline personalities. Desperate for attachment like Julie was, they can change their personality just to please others, and I can absolutely see her doing that.
Definitely.
A dominant person can easily control these people. So Julie's friends believed that her weakened condition was making it easier for Dennis to dominate her. He had wanted a woman he could control and exploit, so in this very sick way, Julie and Dennis were made for each other, at least until she became well, and he didn't like that.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully she becomes well. She's not at that point yet.
No.
But
I think it's when she began to become well and be more confident that he really lashed out at her, is what I'm saying.
She definitely did. She
Yeah.
did become, with medication and therapy, a little more self-realization came in, and she got a better handle of herself.
And he did not like that.
Well, no, because it threatened him.
Yes.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So Julie's doctor believed that she tolerated Dennis's abuse because she may have been conditioned to do so from an early age. And we've seen that.
And so this kind of goes back to her father.
Well, her father and her whole relationship with both parents.
Yes.
So Julie attributed her problems with self-esteem to her job, but her doctor didn't. He felt she was too repressed to realize how unhealthy her family had been. The doctor called her relationship with her father disturbed, and he also said that Julie held deep-seated, unresolved feelings about her mother, particularly over the last years of Mary Jane's life.
So there are a lot of issues going on there.
Oh, there sure are.
That he was able to exploit, that Dennis was able to exploit.
That's right.
Julie had 3 major problems from childhood. She was too close to her mother, too distant from her father, and she lacked her own identity. The more her father ignored her, the more she felt worthless, and the more she went to her mother for comfort. And also, there may have been an uglier side to Carter Miller Sr.'s emotional abandonment of his daughter. Julie's doctor did believe that her father may have sexually abused her. Mary Jane's overprotection may not have been inappropriate in those circumstances, but more of a reaction to abuse in the home. So it was uncertain whether Julie had been molested as a child or whether it was her father that did it, but her doctor absolutely believed that someone in the family had done something awful to damage Julie's psyche.
I think that's a reasonable conclusion, although we'll never know what the whole story is.
No, we won't. Because her brother Carter just really, either he was too young or he's in denial, but he was never able to really say what had happened either.
No, he wasn't. Julie seemed to be much improved as she neared the end of her hospital stay. But as the doctors had warned, she crashed about 10 days later in early October. She was incoherent, talking in symbols and riddles. She talked a lot about her teddy bear and became psychotic and returned to the hospital. So she was discharged and decompensated and got readmitted.
Yes. I think that's repeated more than once. Not sure how many times.
Okay, so it wasn't just admission, discharge, readmission. This was getting or became more of an ongoing.
Well, I don't know how ongoing. It happened at least 2 times, but maybe 3 or 4. Because I know that she was institutionalized for at least 3 months total. I'm not sure how it was broken up, though.
Okay. So here she is, the successful professional in her 30s, clutching her teddy bear as she went to therapy and meals, and she would cry into the stuffed animal. She spent hours on the phone, alternately crying and laughing. She called Dennis at Price Waterhouse, leaving messages for him and saying she was in St. John's, but the receptionist recognized her voice. So we figured out pretty quickly she wasn't in the Bahamas or some nice island.
No.
She was hospitalized.
But Dennis still frequently saw her. He would take her out on passes from the hospital. And to cheer her up, he sent her signed cards, which Julie proudly showed to the other patients and the staff. By late October, Julie was manic and psychotic, suffering from delusions of being a prophet of God. Her doctors wrote, "She has bizarre preoccupations with religious, sexual, lesbian, and grandiose thoughts, incoherent psychotic statements about herself and the world and her family." So she's really gone downhill at that point.
Ouch, I can't believe. I mean, it's almost like she went in relatively okay and just progressively got worse.
Well, I just don't know. Maybe she was just repressing so much that when she finally had to deal with it, it really hit her. I'm not sure.
Things didn't seem to be going particularly well for her.
No, it's an extremely sad story.
And it didn't seem like her therapy was showing any response to it.
I don't know. I mean, sometimes don't things get worse before they get better? I mean, sometimes you have to really delve into your problems.
Well, yeah.
Before you can get past them.
We're looking at least a couple months of treatment and hospitalization at this point.
But I mean, if she'd been through some real trauma, it could take time. She was kept on the antidepressant Tofranol, but was still permitted her passes. So by Halloween 1985, she'd been institutionalized for 5 weeks, and she wasn't allowed to go off the floor without supervision. She was dressed in scrubs, and she was often tied down to her bed. She would refuse her medicine, and as the nurse gave her drugs, sometimes she would scream, "You're doing Dad's dirty work." So she's severely mentally ill at this point.
She is.
And some of it could be related to the medication. I mean, she was begun on Haldol, which is a very serious antipsychotic with a lot of side effects.
But she continued to get passes from the hospital. And she left the hospital November 1st, which, according to another psychiatrist, was bizarre medical treatment and terrible medicine. And I would concur. It just doesn't sound like it's anything other than a recipe for disaster.
Well, Haldol's not something you should be on as an outpatient, as far as I know. I know now they don't like to really use it hardly at all.
I don't think it's really ever used. Maybe I shouldn't say that.
Well, we don't know, but I think it's definitely
rarity.
Saved for extreme cases.
Yeah, so after 52 days of hospitalization, she's sent home November 14th. She was on the Haldol and had a list of appointments with her psychiatrist. And things seemed to be improving. A few weeks after she was released, she was less depressed and was excited about the upcoming holiday season, the 1985 holiday season. She'd no longer have to face the holidays alone. She had found somebody who cared for her and took care of her. So she was planning to introduce her boyfriend Dennis at a family holiday dinner at her aunt and uncle's, which she did. Now Carter, her brother, thought Dennis was distant and aloof and just showed no interest in Julie's family. But Carter's wife, because Carter had been married by this time, she was just thrilled. She thought Dennis was a real catch. He was clean, well-dressed, and well-spoken, just like Julie. So the sister-in-law thought this was great.
Well, she doesn't really know him, sure.
Yeah.
All she sees is this good-looking professional guy.
Yeah.
Well, Dennis stayed over at Julie's house when he wasn't out of town. Then Julie became afraid of living alone. She could hear someone walking in the backyard in the night, she said. She heard crunching on the snow that winter, and she told friends about the noises she heard. And then the friends began to wonder whether Dennis was gaslighting Julie, because she was medically sedated. Julie said
she's still on her drugs. Not just the Haldol. She had some sleeping medications and stuff. So, yeah.
Well, Julie told Dennis that she would feel safer if she got a big dog to live with her, in addition to her Lhasa Apso, who she called Buttons. But Dennis vetoed the whole idea, and he actually convinced Julie into giving Buttons to her brother. So until the day that Julie died, she was begging Dennis to let her have a dog, as if it was his decision. And he told her that she couldn't have a dog, so she went along with what he said.
Right. She's going to do everything she can to go along with what he wants.
Well, then Dennis began pushing Julie to get married. He had been divorced from his first wife on December 20th, and he told Julie that he didn't approve of sleeping over at her house without them being married. So this was new to her. He didn't have a problem with that before. But then he told her if she didn't marry him, he was going to leave her, so it was an ultimatum. Then on Valentine's Day 1986, Julie was promoted and she got a raise. And when she told Dennis that night, he responded by proposing to her.
So one thing I got from this was that despite all her mental instability, I guess she was still able to perform well at work.
Yes, seems like she usually did. Didn't really fall into her professional life too much.
Yeah, amazing. I mean, that's kind of compartmentalizing things, isn't it?
Yeah, yep.
But she is able to function quite well, because I think a promotion and a raise is pretty good.
Yes, she was very organized and hardworking.
So when Dennis proposed, Julie didn't answer him right away. But she did confide to a friend that she felt he didn't love her and was only using her for her money. Should have kept that thought.
Yeah, she was kind of waking up here to some of her delusions.
Dennis wanted Julie to transfer her inheritance money into a joint account with him. Oh, man. And he promised to contribute to the joint account, but he never did. So Julie had a large bank account, she had a house, and she had stocks and bonds. Now, there's no mention ever made by Dennis to put Julie's name on his stocks and bonds or on his real estate. It's all one-sided.
Big red flag there. Well, on Friday, February 21st, Julie told the people in her carpool that she was marrying Dennis the very next day. One of the men asked Julie if they were invited to her wedding, but she answered that Dennis wanted it to be private. Some of the women asked her what she was doing about a wedding dress, but she said she was just going to be wearing one of her work suits. It also came out that there would be no flowers. She said that Dennis didn't want to spend the money on any of that stuff. So she announced the wedding plans that day to her brother Carter and his wife Judy. Carter was quite shocked because Julie had always dreamed of the big wedding, being a bride in the big church wedding, the fancy white dress. That was her lifelong dream.
Yeah, and she'd never been married.
No.
So let's do it right.
This was her chance, but she was giving it up. So Carter and Judy were witnesses at the wedding, and they gave Dennis and Julie a gift certificate for bridal pictures, as well as a bottle of champagne. Julie told them that she and Dennis would save the champagne for a special occasion. But as it would turn out, Dennis would later say that they drank this champagne on the night Julie died. So for the wedding, Carter and Judy met Julie at a small wedding chapel, and it was in the morning, and Dennis was running late. While they were waiting in the chapel, Dennis and his ex-wife Karen were wallpapering their house, which they were going to put up for sale. So Dennis stopped halfway between doing this task, saying that he had to leave, not saying why, and Karen wondered why he was so dressed up on a Saturday morning, because he hadn't mentioned at all Julie or the wedding, any of it. So as Dennis pulled up at the chapel, Julie was telling Carter and Judy why Dennis didn't want a double ring ceremony. So he didn't want to wear a wedding band. And his excuse was, if he wore a wedding band, it might catch on something and hurt his hand. So this is outrageous.
Well, it's very true. You don't want to hurt your finger or your hand.
And this guy works in an office, so it's not like he's working on machinery or anything.
I mean, that's all bullshit.
It was totally bullshit. So he walks into the chapel very casually, and all he says is, "Let's get this thing going," and rushes Julie through the ceremony.
True romance. Then Carter and his wife took them out for a wedding lunch at a nearby restaurant. They ordered food, and Dennis left to make a phone call. Then when he returned, he said to Julie, "We got to get going." Then he left again to make another phone call. And Julie ended up telling her brother there just wasn't any time that day to have wedding pictures. So Dennis returned, hurried everyone out the door. It was no honeymoon, because Dennis said he couldn't spare time away from work.
Which was another lie.
Big lie. We'll see. So 2 days after this really bare-bones wedding, Dennis picked up Julie at her office and took her to lunch. They picked up some sandwiches, then they went to Julie's bank and a notary public to change her financial documents into both their names. Now, Dennis never added her name to anything of his. He also refused to give Julie a key to his house in University City, saying his ex-wife was too jealous. But his ex-wife said she didn't even know he'd remarried.
No, he hadn't told anyone. So he was super frugal with the money. He would put lists on the refrigerator, reminding Julie to name him the beneficiary on her life insurance policies and to go out and buy things for him. And these are things he could have picked up by himself and paid for by himself, but he had her do it. Using her credit cards, he dressed himself in the finest men's clothing, but he never wore these clothes to go out with her. He didn't take her to any of his work functions. He never notified anyone at Price Waterhouse that he had even remarried. So he didn't add her to the insurance, didn't bring her to functions, nothing. So while Julie never had a honeymoon, Dennis did go on one with another woman. He went skiing in Jackson Hole. And he and this woman named Nina had continued dating, and they went on the trip along with a group of her friends, who were wealthy people. And Dennis told one of the men on the trip that he was recently divorced, so now he was playing the field. No mention of Julie at all, obviously.
Well, see, now we know why he didn't want the wedding ring.
Yeah, you think?
So, although he might have been married to Julie, Dennis continued to date Nina that entire spring. Now, when she did find out that Dennis was married, Dennis told her that he had no choice. He said Julie had threatened suicide, and he couldn't bear to see her suffer. He said to Nina that he didn't love Julie, and he didn't even live with her. He had just married her because he felt so sorry for her.
Now, you think she could have seen through that?
I would think she could have,
But she seemed like kind of a jerk, too. Then there was another woman who also had no idea that she was seeing a married man in Dennis. Christy Myers flew into St. Louis from Washington, D.C. the weekend after Dennis's last date with Nina. Christy was going to spend Easter with Dennis in his house in University City. And Dennis performed sexual bondage on Christy. Normally he would tie Christy's arms to the bedpost and then have oral sex and intercourse. But that night Dennis wanted something different. He hogtied Christy and he tried to blindfold her, but Christy refused. He kept trying, to the point of she was getting a little bit afraid. The third rejection, though, he really went into a rage. He went into another room and spent the night alone, angry with her and sulking. But fortunately, the ties were loose enough for Christy to get free. And the next day, he drove her to his parents' home. And he said to his parents, "This is the girl I'm going to marry in August." And meanwhile, Julie, his actual wife, spent Easter alone in her house.
Right, and remember, his parents, his whole family had no idea that he had remarried.
Nobody did,
So
nope.
They knew nothing about Julie. So the next week, Dennis took Julie to a notary public, and they signed papers that gave him power of attorney over her, or for her. Now, Dennis had control of all of Julie's real estate, bonds, stocks, bank accounts, and even her mother's jewelry. Julie tried to protest, but felt overwhelmed by Dennis's arguments, and she didn't want to embarrass him by making a scene. April, 7 weeks after this wonderful wedding ceremony, Julie horrified her carpoolers as she climbed into the van with her head down. Now, normally she wore her hair brushed back, but this day she had combed it over her face. And then she usually only wore lip gloss and mascara, but today she had on thick pancake makeup, and it didn't conceal what looked like 4 or 5 cigarette burns on her face. And there were also thinning patches of hair around her face, as though someone had pulled out chunks of hair.
These are signs of abuse, clearly.
These don't sound good, do they?
But by late April, Julie did seem to be getting stronger. She was more lively and seemed to be enjoying her new job. She seemed to be emerging from Dennis's control a little bit, and she said over lunch one day that she was thinking about getting a divorce. There was another change, too. Instead of her usual suits, she started wearing flowing, pretty dresses. She looked great, and everyone complimented her. Seemed like her self-esteem was improving. Dennis finally moved in with Julie on their 2-month anniversary, which was April 22nd, 1986, and Julie was happy, thinking maybe things are going to be okay. There was also more good news. Interco Incorporated had offered Dennis a job with less travel, so there was only one more business trip that he had to take. He'd be leaving for that business trip on Monday, May 5th, for a week in St. Paul. That weekend, Dennis insisted on something different in bed. He wanted anal sex. Julie told him to stop. She was crying in pain, but he refused and continued. He was clearly enjoying her suffering. When he finished, Julie went into the kitchen where she smoked a cigarette at the table crying, and she waited for Dennis to come in and apologize to her. When he came to the doorway, though, he screamed at her, "You're just going to learn how to like that. You better get used to it." And then he criticized her for smoking. So Julie was devastated. They spent Sunday night, May 4th, together. Dennis watched a TV movie about Ted Bundy. On the phone, Julie told a friend in Florida, "I'm afraid of my husband. I'd like to throw him out, but if I push for a divorce, he could have me institutionalized. He has power of attorney." So she's fucked here. It's a bad situation. He could have all her stuff and put her away.
Yes, he could. I mean, it would be a battle because, despite her history, she was at that time in command of her psyche.
Yeah, I guess, but she wasn't much of a fighter.
Right, but I don't think it was as easy as she supposed that he would just say, okay, institutionalize her, she's nuts.
So maybe she didn't realize how much power she did have.
Yeah.
But she certainly felt trapped.
Yeah, no, I can see that.
Well, on that Monday, May 5th, Julie was concerned about a deposit Dennis was supposed to have made the previous Thursday into a joint account that they had set up at the bank. Julie said to her friend Terry, this is the last chance for him to come through with his promise to deposit money into a joint account. So maybe she was starting to stand up to him. She seemed like she was back to her old self, according to Terry. She was angry and ready to fight for her rights. Totally fed up with Dennis, she had dumped some of his shirts and sweaters into a large black garbage bag that evening, and she invited her friend Terry over, but Terry was busy, so Julie went home alone.
And her brother Carter was getting out of the shower Tuesday morning, May 6th. Julie's neighbor called and told him that there was a fire at his sister's house. Judy drove Carter to the house where a police officer told him that his sister had died in the fire. When they watched the news on TV that evening, Carter learned his sister had died naked and taped to her bedroom rocking chair. He ended up kicking in the TV set because he knew Dennis was responsible for this. So the condition of Julie's body when it was found in her garage was shocking.
To say the least,
That's an understatement.
Absolutely.
Smoke was still curling from the charred stubs of her feet, and they were sticking high into the air. A car was parked on each side of an overturned rocking chair, and strapped into the chair was her nude blackened corpse with her face burnt beyond recognition. Her lower face and body were wrapped in tape. Neat, even rows of tape bound her arms to the chair. More tape crisscrossed her chest, leaving her breasts exposed. More was wound around her mouth and jaw. The rows were all even and precise. The only untidy strips were the parts hanging from the legs of the chair. Large sections of blue tape were wound about each wrist and elbow. But clearly this is a homicide.
You would think so.
No signs of forced entry, no break-ins into the garage or the house. Certainly the spouse was going to be a primary suspect. But Dennis was out of town on business.
Well, officers went into the house to check the closets and drawers. Other officers were sent to interview anyone whose name appeared in Julie's address book, which they found in her purse. Arson specialists worked to determine how the fire was started and what accelerant was used, because it was clearly arson. Everyone at the crime scene that morning assumed that Julie had died in the fire. She was so smothered in tape, lab assistants had to cut her from the rocking chair where she had died. The fire had literally cooked much of Julie. The feet and ankles had burned right down to her bone. The heat had caused facial capillaries to break, creating kind of a raw red mask from her nose to her eyes. Now, fortunately for the investigator, her internal organs were undamaged. So there was no evidence of soot in the throat or the lungs, which proved that Julie was dead before she'd been put into the fire. There was 47 feet of tape wound around her arms, 29 feet of white 1.5-inch adhesive tape on the right arm, along with 3 feet of vinyl-coated blue tape. The left arm was bound with 14 feet of white tape and 3.5 feet of blue tape. More than 30 feet of tape were wrapped around her face and hair as well, and there was no way to tell if the charred stubs of her feet and legs had also been taped. It was just too far gone. As the medical examiner pried open the jaws of her body, 2 chunks of white material popped out of her mouth. They were plumped up and swollen with saliva, and these turned out to be 2 pieces of white terry cloth. They would have had to been forced in under pressure to have them come out like that. So these were gags that had pushed her tongue so far back that she couldn't breathe, and the official cause of Julie's death was asphyxiation. The medical examiner estimated that she could have breathed for a while, depending upon the position of the gags and the position of her head. But if the gags were placed in the front of her mouth and her tongue were shoved back immediately, Julie could have actually lived for 8 horrific minutes before she suffered permanent brain damage and died. So that would make her death a murder. She had only minutes to be rescued by whoever had tied her up. There was this excessive amount of tape, too, at least 76 feet of tape. It was unbelievable that any woman would allow someone to tie them up with so much tape. There were few known cases of erotic deaths with a partner, because the partner is usually the failsafe. Julie was the first case of a woman dying during partner bondage in America. Whoever was with Julie had fatally betrayed her. This was sadomasochistic bondage. There was no way to tell if she had fought the person who was gagging and binding her. The burning of her body eliminated any bruises or abrasions that might have been there. Also, the fire erased her assailant's fingerprints on her skin and on the tape. So the state fire marshal who investigated arson cases went over the fire scene. There was a rag stuffed into the tailpipe of Julie's car, and that was secured with tape. There were also 2 gas cans along the wall of the garage. The fire marshal also found a metal pot lid with burned matter and wondered what that was doing in the garage.
So Dennis, remember, he'd been out of town. He was in St. Paul.
That's his alibi.
He was brought back to town by a colleague. He seemed pretty shocked by his wife's death. He was very well dressed and very well put together. He never asked any questions about his wife's death. He only asked about her property. An early suspect in Julie's death was Dennis's first wife, Karen. She was an executive at Southwestern Bell, where Julie had also worked. Her possible motive was the jealousy of an ex-wife. But as we said, she didn't even know he was married.
No, she didn't.
And she had an alibi. So within a few days, the detectives eliminated her as a suspect. So on Thursday, May 8th, Dennis was called at his parents' house to return for another interview. But his parents didn't know where he was, and no one was able to reach him. He did not attend Julie's wake on Friday or her funeral on Saturday. Loving husband that he is.
No, that's amazing.
Yep.
He didn't even show up.
And Carter was left to handle all the arrangements, and he even had to pay to have the house boarded up.
Well, the major case squad asked Julie's former housekeeper to go through the house with police to see if there was anything missing. I mean, maybe there was a robbery, but nothing had been stolen. The interesting thing was that some things had been added. The housekeeper pointed out 3 sex manuals, Joy of Sex, More Joy of Sex, and Making Love Better were there, and she knew those weren't Julie's. Some of the books explained how to perform sexual bondage safely. There were also 2 vibrators in the bedroom that were brand new. The cleaning woman went through the basement. Hanging on the clothesline, there was a white slip, and she said, well, that couldn't be Julie's. Julie was a size 6, and this slip was a size 11-12. So it's somebody else's. We don't know whose.
Have no idea.
The day of the funeral, 4 days after Julie's body was discovered, detectives found a gray metal file box among Julie's things. Inside were 3 photos of nude women. One was Dennis's first wife. The other 2 were of another woman who looked like a teenager. In one of the pictures, her ankles were bound together. So they tried to find that person. And they searched for Dennis. on Saturday, May 10th. They went through his desk at Price Waterhouse and they called his colleagues. No one had any clue where he was. They knew from his colleague Jim Mackey that Dennis flew back to St. Paul with him on the morning Julie was murdered. So how could he have killed her? His co-workers said that they saw him there the night before.
So when they were looking into Dennis's appointment book and reading his diary, police learned that Dennis was a social climber and a womanizer. He had dozens of women that he was sexually active with. Julie was not mentioned anywhere except in a list of her assets. And it also listed her account numbers. You know, he's got power of attorney. He's got total control over this stuff.
Yes.
So after his sister had been murdered, Carter received a notice from the photographer that the wedding pictures were ready. When Carter picked them up, he was stunned and saddened. Dennis hadn't even gone to the photographer with his wife. The photos were of Julie alone.
That is just heartbreaking to me whenever I think of that.
So sad.
Can you just see her going and having the pictures taken by herself when her whole dream was to get married and have a wedding and have someone love her? It's just heartbreaking.
It is. Now, on May 11th, 5 days after the murder, the all-points bulletin on Dennis paid off. 2 days earlier, a bricklayer had seen an abandoned car parked with its flashers on. The bricklayer and his 2 assistants went over to check the car. They couldn't get inside to turn off the lights and save the battery. The car was locked with the keys in the ignition. They saw 2 envelopes on the dashboard, and a license check showed that the car belonged to Dennis's mother.
Yeah, 2 St. Louis County police technicians worked to open the 2 envelopes on the dashboard without destroying any fingerprints. Inside, they found a will and testament addressed to a socially prominent attorney, a 3-page note to Dennis's family, a 1-page list of Dennis's household goods with a photocopy, an engagement book, and his resume. Dennis also left in his mother's car a suicide note dated for May 8th. Dennis accused 2 detectives of emotional police brutality. That's a new one, which had pushed him over the edge. The note was a profile of self-pity, blame, and projection. Dennis blamed other people for his own actions, and he implied that Julie had killed herself. He was explicit about how sexually deranged Julie was, and he whined over and over that she had ruined his life. Unbelievable.
Isn't it?
Sick.
Dennis sent an anonymous letter to his parents' address, and this was turned over by the post office to authorities who had a federal search warrant to open it. Now, inside there is a detailed letter about his finances, which Dennis wanted his mother to manage. But one time he mentioned Julie by name since he killed her. Dennis ordered his parents to transfer her extensive jewelry collection, which he put in his safe deposit box, into their safe deposit box. Classy guy.
Yeah, so that's really all he cared about. He stood to inherit more than $300,000 from Julie's estate, which in 1986 would have bought him a fully paid house in the best suburb. As primary beneficiary, he would gain $18,000 from his wife's savings plan at Southwestern Bell, $40,000 from her life insurance there, $1,500 in employee stock ownership, over $3,000 in unpaid wages, over $39,000 in sickness and death benefits, and a total of more than $100,000 from her company alone. So Dennis called his girlfriend Christy's parents' home in Wisconsin on May 13th. Her sister Sissy answered, and he said he was John Masterson of Price Waterhouse, and had dated Christy under the name John Mason while he was in Washington, and he told her he was trying to find Christy. But Sissy was afraid for her sister's safety, and she called the St. Louis police that night. The St. Louis police contacted the FBI. The next day, Dennis called Christy in her Washington, D.C. office. He thought that the police couldn't tap government phones, but he was wrong about that. The FBI had a tracer on Christy's office phone. So the last time Dennis called her was July 3rd while Christy was at work. And this was a long conversation, and Christy asked him where he was, but again Dennis refused to tell her. Then suddenly Dennis said, "It's all up, they got me," because he was arrested in a phone booth as he was talking to Christy. A house painter named Gary Matzenbacher came forward after seeing Dennis's picture in the news. He said he had picked up a hitchhiker looking like Dennis on May 6th at the intersection of Holloway and Manchester Roads, which was about 1.5 miles from Julie's house. He ended up being a very important witness for the prosecution. So far, he was the only person who could prove to a jury that Dennis Bullock had been in that area at the time his wife was murdered. He was the only one who could disprove Dennis's alibi that he had spent the night of May 5th in St. Paul.
On May 13th, a police officer went to a ticket agent, put 3 photos of Dennis on the counter, and asked the agent if he had ever seen him. The agent said he had. He had seen him on May 6th. A man who was nervous, disheveled with wet matted hair and sweating, had showed up at 6:30 in the morning that day, and the agent sold him a one-way ticket to St. Paul. This was paid for in cash. The man said he was David Johnson. Mr. Johnson had no luggage. And the agent also picked out Dennis during the police lineup.
So investigators were able to map out Dennis's activity on May 5th and 6th from payphone records and from the witness testimony. So May 5th, 6:14 p.m., Dennis called Julie from the Holiday Inn Town Square and talked to her for 7 minutes. At 7:20 p.m., he signed out of Farm Credit Building nearby, and at 7:30 he was last seen by Jim Mackey and another co-worker walking near the hotel. At 8:50 p.m., he was on Republic Air Flight 88 departing St. Paul. At 10:11 p.m., he arrived in St. Louis. Then on May 6th at 4 a.m., a neighbor 2 blocks away heard an argument and heard a woman screaming on White Tree Lane. At 5:10 a.m., Baldwin dispatcher received the fire call from a neighbor, and at 5:15 a.m., Gary Matzenbacher picked up Dennis hitchhiking. At 6:30 a.m., Dennis bought a ticket from Northwest Orient Flight 421 from Lampert to St. Paul, and at 6:45 a.m., Jim Mackey received the long-distance call from Lampert, and Dennis asked him to cover for him. At 7 a.m., his flight departed, and then at 8:25 a.m., it arrived in St. Paul. At 8:30 a.m., Mackey tried to contact Dennis in his room at the Holiday Inn for half an hour and got no answer. At 9:15 a.m., the manager opened the door of his room and Mackey found Dennis in the shower. And Dennis came out of the shower all casual-like and said, "Hey, did I tell you I was married?" Kind of late trying to cover up there.
Too little, too late. So he is arrested and charged with murder in the death of his wife, Julie. Then we go to trial. The main problem with the trial was trying to find friends and associates of Dennis who would testify. A lot of people were afraid of him. They thought he had come after them. Dennis's ex-wife Karen was so afraid of him that she totally avoided the detectives.
For a while, they finally caught up with her. But that last weekend that he spent with Julie, Dennis photographed her silver, china, her furniture, and her paintings. The day before the fire, the same day he arrived in St. Paul for the business trip, Dennis dropped off some film in a place that he thought no St. Louis cop would ever find it. To the prosecutors, this evidence showed that Dennis committed cold-blooded, premeditated murder and arson. His motive was her money, and they decided to seek the death penalty against him.
Now, Dennis's defense was that Julie was not a helpless victim in sexual bondage, but she was the initiator and the instructor. According to Dennis, Julie was not only sexually promiscuous, she also was sexually abnormal. So a jury could reasonably decide that she was a willing participant in the bondage that led to her accidental death.
Yeah, I don't know how reasonable it is.
I don't think it's reasonable at all, but something worked.
Well, papers found in Julie's house showed motive for murder clearly, money. In Julie's handwriting, there was a list of some of her valuables, boxes of gold and silver coins, stock certificates, and a listing of her jewelry, which was appraised at $44,000. Now remember, back in this time, you could buy a house for that. I mean, that's probably equal to $300,000 in today's money, just guessing. It's worth a lot more anyway.
It is. So the prosecution emphasized how Dennis was a cheating, lying, social climbing sadist who was only after Julie's money. He secretly married her when she was mentally unstable. After 2 months, when he couldn't control her or her finances anymore, he tied her up and watched her slowly suffocate. In a complete contradiction, Dennis Bullock's defense attorney described Julie as a sexually aggressive woman who lured Dennis into bizarre sexual rituals to satisfy her desires. As a result, she died accidentally. He also argued as a successful investor and Pricewaterhouse consultant, Dennis didn't need Julie's money. Dennis thought Julie had burned to death in the garage fire, and he ran away, blaming himself.
I don't know how they presented it, but this story just doesn't hold water to me at all.
It's just, I'm reading the stuff on this, and I'm just blown away.
Yeah.
How people could think that way.
It's crazy. It's such an injustice. The first witnesses were the police, firefighters, and fire marshals that were on the scene on May 6th. They explained how arson had burned most of Julie Bullock's car and the garage in less than an hour. The fire had been started in the back seat of her Buick. A rag had been wrapped around and stuffed into the exhaust pipe and covered with blue tape, the same tape that was on her body, and also the gas cap had been removed, so this was totally set up as arson. Her diaries and the audio tapes she made begging Dennis to treat her better were not allowed to be used in court. Also, Julie's friends couldn't testify about things she had told them either because it was considered hearsay. Now, in many places that law has changed, and thankfully, a lot of that can be used today. But none of that was allowed to be used, and I just feel like Julie was just re-victimized in this. And Dennis found Jesus while he was in jail and became the model prisoner. In court, he wore a different tailored suit each day, dry cleaned and brought in by his mother. His parents were blue-collar, hard-working, ordinary people, and they emptied their retirement accounts to hire Dennis's defense attorney. But Julie's reputation was destroyed by the defense. A friend of Julie's testified that Julie had told her she had had sex with her brother Carter, and I don't know why this woman said that. It was admissible because what Julie said was self-incriminating, but it's really unclear why her friend would say this, because for one thing, that would have nothing to do with the case, and it just makes Julie look bad. And if they look into it, it turned out that Julie really might have just said that she slept with her brother on the night her mother died, meaning that they slept in the same house or maybe the same room, or maybe even the same bed, but she never had said anything about actually having sex with him. So this was just really turned around to make Julie and her brother look horrible. Because remember, their whole thing here is to make Julie look deranged, and sexually deranged especially. Also, remember, Julie had said a lot of strange things when she was mentally unstable and on medication.
She had. Her brother Carter denied that there was any incest in the family. But he got torn apart on the stand also, because it was revealed during his cross-examination that he had had an affair outside of his marriage, and this included bondage. So the implication was that both Carter and Julie were both sexual deviants. Then one of the state's key witnesses was Dr. George Gantner, who was the medical examiner. Dr. Gantner explained how Julie had died of asphyxia from the gags and why it was a homicide. Now, he had determined she died before the fire was started. Liquor and drugs were not involved in the murder. Julie's blood alcohol was 0. She didn't die from the chair tipping over. There were no bruises on the back of her head. She had died from the gags. The terry cloth gags had been jammed in. They had forced her tongue back, blocking her airway. Bits of material had been found between her teeth, indicating that Julie had struggled against the bonds. Now, after she was deprived of oxygen for several minutes, Julie would have become so brain damaged she couldn't have been saved anyway.
An uncertified activity therapist who had worked in the psychiatric ward when Julie was there testified against Julie. He said that Julie had developed a crush on him during her hospitalization and had asked him on a date for after she was discharged. And around this time, Julie had become psychotic and depressed. And he said that she was dressing inappropriately. He said her outfits were often revealing. But then he admitted on cross-examination that Julie was very ill at that time. Her records showed that she was suffering from delusions. But once this was out, it made her look bad. I mean, you can't take that stuff back. Dennis did take the stand in his own defense, and he was very smooth and seemed to have an answer to everything. He said that the night of Julie's death was their third time practicing sexual bondage. He said he thought Julie's taste for bondage and taping was odd, but he was just being dutiful and following her fantasies. According to Dennis, Julie told him to tear a terry cloth washcloth into gags, and he said that she inserted them into her cheeks, one on each side. He said that she began wrapping her jaw with adhesive tape, and he watched Julie wrap her own mouth and chin. Then he taped her arms and legs for her. He said he used the large length of tape because that's what Julie had wanted before. He claimed that he was in the bathroom getting sick to his stomach when Julie died, and he didn't hear any struggle, but when he returned to her side, the chair was tipped over and she wasn't breathing. So then he admitted he panicked and started the fire. But he's denying that he killed her on purpose, which is the big thing, right?
Right. Yep. So the jury was instructed to find Dennis guilty or not guilty of murder in the first degree, which would be premeditated murder, murder in the second degree, or involuntary manslaughter, which would be described as recklessly and consciously ignoring a substantial risk, a gross deviation from what a normal person in similar circumstances would do. Took the jury 6 hours to reach a verdict, and they found him guilty of involuntary manslaughter.
Which to me is unbelievable.
I don't know what trial these jurors were attending.
Yeah.
You know?
I don't know. But 2 days after the verdict, Dennis was released on $50,000 bond until his sentencing, which would happen that July. Then, 15 days after that verdict, Dennis was charged with tampering with evidence for burning Julie's diary and some other stuff, and armed criminal action for using the tape to suffocate her. A week later, the St. Louis County grand jury indicted him on those charges. The grand jury indicted Dennis for second-degree arson and the burning of the garage. Prosecutors expected the 3 charges to be tried together in a second trial of Dennis, and his bond was raised to $500,000, which his defense attorney had reduced to $300,000. But his parents still couldn't come up with that much money, so he did remain in jail that time. And he was sentenced on July 10, 1987, to 7 years in prison and a $5,000 fine.
Right, and this is for the involuntary manslaughter charge.
Mm-hmm. A year after his first conviction for her death, he showed no emotion when he was found guilty of the tampering with evidence and second-degree arson charges, and he was sentenced to 11 years. But in February of 1990, a panel of judges reversed Dennis's arson and tampering convictions and ordered a new trial for him. He'd served 4 years by that time, but he was let out on bond while he awaited that trial.
Unbelievable. So on this trial, in less than 90 minutes, the jury found him guilty and recommended the maximum sentences of 7 years for the arson charge and 5 years for the tampering with evidence charge. So a total of 12 years in prison. So this meant that he would have to go back and spend another 4 to 5 years, at least, in prison before becoming eligible for parole again in 1995.
Yeah, but here's the crazy part. The judge allowed him to remain out on a $150,000 bond, pending his appeal. What the hell?
I know.
If I was in Julie's family, I would be so upset. There was no evidence ever that Julie ever participated in bondage before she was with Dennis. He absolutely physically abused her. There were witnesses to that, at least to the damage that she had. But none of that was allowed to be brought up in any of the 3 trials. Not only had he beaten his first wife and girlfriends, but Julie's friends from work suspected that he pulled out her hair and put out cigarettes on her face back in April of '86. Most domestic murderers do have a history of violence, especially toward their wives. And he did. So her brother Carter inherited Julie's estate, and Dennis was found ineligible for the fire insurance claim, which he still tried to get.
Dennis did get released from prison in 1993.
Yep.
In 1995, an ex-girlfriend complained that he was harassing her when she came home and found him in her apartment. The charges were dropped after she moved away, and she said she was afraid of him. Now, after that, he was on house arrest until his 1996 release from parole.
It just seems like such a very unjust verdict. And what's truly maddening is how Julie, the victim, was re-victimized in the courtroom. That is so upsetting.
This was just such a sad case.
Yeah.
And the more I got into it, I just felt more and more depressed.
Well, it's really sad what happened to her and that he got away with this, really.
It is.
I mean, I'm glad he got some prison time, but it just wasn't nearly enough.
No, and I'm wondering, maybe behind the scenes, did he have a really good lawyer? Was the prosecution really inept? Or was the jury made up of a bunch of stupid people?
I don't know, maybe a combination. I mean, I did read that Dennis himself was very charming and his attorney was quite charming as well. That might have been part of it. But the way that they were allowed to just tear down Julie, I'm hoping that some of our more current laws wouldn't allow that to be repeated. But I'd just like to say thank you to Ellen Harris. She's the author of Dying to Get Married, The Courtship and Murder of Julie Miller Bullock. There really isn't any media available on this case, not a lot of documents either because it's older. So most of our information on this case comes from her book. It's a case I'd never heard of before. And yeah, it is sad, but it's also a fascinating look at what the justice system can do to a victim. Any other comments on the case?
I've said all I want to say.
Well, I'd just like to give my sympathy to her brother Carter on having to deal with all this and losing his whole family like that. So the music for True Crime Brewery is written and produced by Tristan Capel. If you want more TCB, you can go to our website, which is tiegrabber.com, to join Team Tiegrabber. And you can get access to members-only episodes that we record once a month. Along with getting access to these episodes, we also send out gifts to people who sign up. And you can also go to Patreon if you'd rather and become a patron, where you'll get the same benefits and the same access. This month, we covered the murders of Sheila LaBar, a real sociopath from our nearby old stomping grounds in New Hampshire. So that one's available in the members-only feed now, along with 25 or 30 other episodes. And the other episodes include the story of the killer mom, Diane Downs, the fascinating case of the disappearance of Robert Fisher, who took off and has never been seen again after killing his entire family and burning down their house. There are some crazy episodes in that feed.
There are.
Some other ways for you to show your support for True Crime Brewery are to follow us on Twitter at TieGrabberPods, on Instagram, TieGrabber Podcasts, also on Facebook. You can also join our True Crime Brewery fan discussions group on Facebook. We have lots of conversations on there about past cases and current crime topics. It's just really interesting if you're into crime. If you enjoyed the show, also we would love it if you'd take a minute to give us a review on iTunes or wherever you listen. We're going to move forward with our feedback segment now, but remember you can send us feedback and case suggestions in an email to truecrimebrewery@tiegrabber.com, or you can even tell us in your own voice by leaving a voicemail on our Leave a Voicemail link, which is on the front page of our website, tiegrabber.com. One more note, we have extended our Get a Free T-shirt offer for voicemail senders that get played on the air. Is that true? Voicemail senders? Is that proper English?
Sure.
Okay.
That works.
So if you have interesting comments or something to say, just leave us a voicemail. If it gets played on one of our shows, we're going to send you some gifts, including a T-shirt. All right, Dick, what have we got for voicemails today?
So we have 3 voicemails. The first one is from Lizzie.
Hi, Dick and Jill. I'm Lizzie from Queensland, Australia. I only recently found you and absolutely love listening and almost feel like I've watched and listened to nearly everything. But a lot of your podcasts give extra information and background, which I find just fascinating. You just do such great research. I've got a case suggestion for you. Of all the documentaries I've watched and listened to, nothing has haunted me more than the story of Mary Boyle. Ever since I saw it 2 years ago, it still outrages me. I theorise in my head about it and feel such a sense of sadness for the justice of this little girl. Mary Boyle was a little Irish girl. She was about 5 years old when she went missing from her grandparents' remote property. So this was in Ireland. She was an identical twin, and to this day, Her body has never been found. It was as though she vanished, but she didn't vanish. It seems her family know exactly what happened. But no one is talking except her twin sister today is trying to get justice done, and her little bones buried and put to rest. So this is a police cover-up story, which makes you so angry, but it's a damn good story. And it'll make your blood boil, but the killer's still alive and living in the area, and he's now pretty old. So the twin wants the story to come out and the killer convicted. So that was the whole reason for their documentary. So I just feel that if you guys talk about this, I mean, I want to hear your theories on why the cover-up, why are there politicians and police involved. But I also think it'll shine a light on the case, perhaps put a bit of pressure on Ireland to do something. So love you to check it out. Love you both. Talk soon. Bye.
Well, thank you, Lizzie. We love you too. That is a great case suggestion. That sounds like there'd be a lot of family dynamics to look into, which we love.
It does. I mean, the twin sister has been quite strident in trying to find her killer. And it's turned the rest of the family against her. So that's interesting. And it's also, and the case has been labeled as Ireland's Madeleine McCann. Interesting. The difficulty potentially is that it's a 40-year-old case.
So documentation might be hard to find.
I'll try to find more than I found so far.
Okay.
But I think that's a fascinating case.
Excellent.
Okay, now Kate is next, and she also has a case suggestion.
All right.
Hi, Jill and Dick. It's Kate, your Christmas singer from a couple of years back. I hope you've settled into your new quiet end in New Mexico. I continue enjoying your podcast and your company every week. Aside from your sleuthing and camaraderie, I am also impressed that you guys are vegan. Way to go. I'd like to suggest a case from my region, Rochester, New York. It concerns the murder of Craig Rideout, a husband and father whose body was found near a rural roadside in Yates County on July 21st, 2016. His estranged wife, Laura, and their oldest son, Colin, were convicted of second-degree murder in July 2017, and another son, Alex, was convicted of 2 counts of tampering with evidence for his role in the botched effort to cover up the crime. Laura's boyfriend, Paul Tucci, was found not guilty of murder and tampering charges. In addition to articles, there's a Dateline NBC segment from September 2017 called Devil's Bathtub about the case. It interviews prosecutors, defense attorneys, investigators, and family members, and explores how marital discord set the Rideout family on a path toward murder. In addition to Dateline, there's an article in the Democrat and Chronicle online that's called Craig Rideout Murder: What NBC Dateline Didn't Tell You About the Case. Since the murder took place in the heart of the Finger Lakes, I'm sure Dick will be able to find a delicious beer to accompany the murder and mayhem. Love the podcast. Thank you so much, guys.
Thanks, Kate. I hate to admit it, I'd forgotten about the great song. That was a couple Christmases ago, right?
It was.
It was awesome.
Yep.
The Finger Lakes region, that's where there's a farm sanctuary, animal farm, which is a great place to visit. If you're vegan, it's a great place to visit, spend time with the animals, learn about the lifestyle. Plus, it's a beautiful place. They have a lot of wineries and breweries. I think that's the only place I know that has a soft serve vegan ice cream stand. So, just a little side note on that. But this case does sound excellent.
It's an interesting case. Here's this guy. He and his wife have been married over 20 years, and she starts having an affair with the guy's best friend, leaves him for this best friend, and then this divorce got really bitter. There were 4 or 5 kids involved, and the older ones were out of the house. The younger ones went with him instead of the mother, and it was a really bitter fight. And as Kate said, he was killed. He had acid poured onto his face to disfigure him. The wife, the lover, and 2 of the kids were indicted for murder. And as Kate said, the wife and one of the kids were convicted of that, and lesser charges against the lover and the other other kid. So interesting.
Stunning,
I think that'd be a fun one.
I know you hate to say fun.
I think that would be a good case to do.
But then you hate to say interesting because we say that so much. We need to come up with some more vocabulary.
We do. I'll go to my thesaurus.
Okay. All right. But yeah, good suggestion.
Yes. Thanks, Kate. And one more voicemail that is also a very interesting one. And I just love Betsy's speech. So let's hear her.
Okay.
Hello, Dick and Jill. I enjoy your podcast very much, but I would love to hear you do a murder that happened in the Orkney Islands of Scotland, where we never have any murders. It's the murder of Shamsuddin Mahmood. That's Mahmood, 25 years ago. It's very convoluted and interesting, and rather a sad case for us. Thank you very much for True Crime Brewery. It keeps me going. I get it on Tuesday afternoon and I enjoy it very much. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
See, I could just listen to that Scottish brogue all day long.
Oh my God. I just love the way she sounds. And I love the way she says True Crime Brewery. Oh
Yep.
my goodness.
Yeah.
I love it. Okay.
So this is an interesting case. This is, as Betsy said, a case on the Orkney Islands, which are a small group of islands off the coast of Scotland. Most of them are uninhabited. A couple of them are. So Mahmood was working at an Indian restaurant, the Mumtaz restaurant in Kirkwall on the Orkney Islands. Door opened and a man dressed in black with a balaclava came in, walked across the room up to Mahmood, pulled out a gun, and shot him, point blank.
Execution
style. So no evidence could be found, and the murder case went cold. And for 14 years, the people of Orkney lived in the shadow of an unsolved murder.
Yeah. This
So,
mystery gunman could
mystery
still be
gunman.
around. And this is a place where this stuff just does not happen.
It doesn't happen. So it turns out that the police chief's son was eventually arrested and convicted. And I'll just leave it at that because I think it's something I'd want to do.
Okay, awesome. Let's get to our emails because this is a long episode.
I got 3 emails.
Okay, I'll do the first one. This is a case suggestion from Patricia. I love you guys and I'm pretty faithful. Have you done this guy? Harold Henthorne. I read the book, but until I watched American Monster on ID, that's one of my favorite shows, we watched that. Lots of home movies, and seeing her is heartbreaking. To me, it seems he has usurped her motherhood. She appeared unhappy even in wedding photos. My take, she was aging, wanted to be a mom, and took a risk against what might have been a gut sense of darkness. Many layers here. I hope you consider this fascinating case. Deep bow and gratitude. 4 brewski reviews, too. So she gave you some beer reviews?
No.
Oh, she loves the
She
reviews.
Gratitude, FOR. I
Oh.
know she wrote the number 4, but
Well, she must be young, and we can't follow that, right?
I'm too
She's
old.
using the young people's abbreviations, but great. Okay. So Harold Henthorne was convicted of murder for pushing his wife off a cliff in 2012. This was his second wife. Oh, I think I remember this. We've seen this case.
something or read something or this, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this is one that I've thought about would be a good one to do before. So definitely put that on our list for this summer.
I am.
Okay. All right. Another email?
Another email is from Claire. She has a case suggestion with a beer suggestion. So it's a little lengthy. I'll get through it. I'm a subscriber that, like everyone else who has heard your podcast, loves it.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm a pediatric nurse in Portland, Oregon.
Nice.
So this fact has at times made it difficult to listen to your show since many crimes are about murdered young children, which I consider to be absolutely precious and deserving of the utmost respect, love, and nurturing.
Of course.
I've been going through a stressful time of work at the moment, so tonight I decided to drink a beer, a weeknight even.
Wow.
I'm a lover of sours, something I was introduced to by Jill.
That fills me with pride.
See?
Yeah. It is great stuff, isn't it?
It is. You talked to Claire, I guess. So she tried Cranberry Wit, brewed at the Crew Fermentation Project Brewery in Bend, Oregon. She says, I realize this is not a sour, but it tastes just like one. Yeah, and I think it's a wit beer, a wheat beer, but it's got enough pucker power to it that it's a sour. Another beer I love is an ale called Brown Sugar by Lagunitas Brewery in Petaluma, California. It is heavy, rich, and sweet with notes of caramel, more like a dessert than a beverage. Give it a try.
Yum.
Well, I've drunk a lot of Lagunitas, and this is one of my favorites. I love Brown Sugar, and it's just as Claire describes. So in terms of crimes, I don't believe I've heard this case suggestion on your show so far, so I want to throw it out there. Andrew David Bagby was a promising young physician who was murdered by his mentally unstable ex-girlfriend, who is also a physician, Shirley Jane Turner. She also murdered their 1-year-old son, baby Zachary, by drugging him and then jumping into the ocean with him. Apparently, Andrew never had the chance to know that Shirley was pregnant with his son. So it sounds interesting, doesn't it?
Yeah, right.
I believe that the woman did this out of pure spite to hurt Andrew and his family, or Andrew's family, in the deepest possible way. Netflix has a heartbreaking but well-done documentary on this story called Dear Zachary. And there's a book authored by the victim's father called A Dance with the Devil, a memoir of murder and loss by David Bagby.
I think Dear Zachary has been recommended to me, but I haven't watched it.
Well, we should look.
I think this would be a good one to cover. Yep. All right.
Okay.
And then Claire thanks us and listens to us when she's commuting to work and at the gym. Says some great stuff to us. So thank you, Claire, so much. We appreciate it.
We'll look into this case, Claire.
Okay.
And then you're going to do the last one. This is Melissa with a comment on Shameless.
Okay, Shameless is the last episode we did, and it was about Mick Philpott. And Melissa wrote, just listening to the latest episode of your show and had to pause to send a quick note about Jill's comparison to the FLDS church's practices. I've been fascinated by the FLDS for decades, and since we do have some communities here in Arizona, I've been able to keep up with some of the reporting related to state assistance. State assistance becomes a necessity for these large families simply because there aren't enough adult incomes to be able to support all of the children. 2-income families are the norm, where there are 2 parents in the household, but with a 1-to-many male-to-female ratio and with many wives remaining in the home, the number of incomes are proportionately lower. While this kind of fraud isn't part of the FLDS doctrine historically, under Warren Jeffs, incarcerated prophet for the FLDS, and that's who I was trying to talk about and I couldn't think of his name,
Right.
and possibly under his predecessor, his father Rulon, outside culture is seen as intrinsically evil and therefore does not need to be respected. As a result, taking full advantage of loopholes in the system, leveraging authority in civil jurisdiction, is seen as moral, as well as advantageous. Interesting, I wouldn't have known that. She goes on, there have been serious abuses of public funding, particularly in Hilldale, Utah, Colorado City, Arizona, which straddles the Arizona-Utah border. The city is notoriously insular, with public services and city offices largely under FLDS control. The school district there purchased an aircraft using school district funds, the only school district in the state to own one, which ended up flagging the district for serious investigation, and then takeover by the state on multiple grounds of funding fraud. It is equally important to note that the mainstream LDS Church does have a strong cultural commitment to internal self-sufficiency, so most families work hard to make the most of what they have, to plan ahead for emergencies, and to support one another in times of struggle, and to live within their means, even while some have large families. This doesn't mean that mainstream church members reject state assistance, but that incidents of gross abuses are less common than in the FLDS, and probably no more common than in other religious communities that espouse large families. Interesting. A lot of that I would not have predicted. I'm surprised a little bit.
I don't think so.
No?
No.
It's about what you
I mean,
expected?
yeah, it really is. And I think the statement that any other religious communities that espouse large families probably has its share of people that try to get all they can out of the system.
Well, and I really have a hard time being bothered by it because I feel like children should have everything they need. So even if you don't agree with their idea of having the big family or how they live their lives, if they're raising children and as long as the money's going to make the children's lives better, I can't really say I have a problem with it.
Well, sure, but that's a whole other thing. And who knows? The the primary object of these families is to increase the welfare of the kids.
I know, but I like to give people the benefit of the doubt,
You're
at least until I'm proven wrong.
way too charitable, I think.
Well,
Anyway,
people have told me that before, but I'm okay with that.
okay. But those are great comments, Melissa. Thank
Yes, thank you very much. And once again, thank you to everyone for your voicemails and your emails. We really appreciate your comments and your suggestions, and I'd say at least 80% of our cases come from suggestions at this point.
you. Oh, absolutely.
Yep.
I've got enough suggestions to keep us going for the next 5 years.
Wonderful.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for listening, and we will see you next time at The Quiet End.
Quiet end. Here we come.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.